My husband sneered. Buy your own food, stop living off me. I said nothing. Weeks later, on his birthday, 20 relatives rushed into the kitchen, then went silent. He turned pale. What did you do? I smiled. Exactly what you told me to. The thing about being humiliated in your own kitchen is that the sound of it doesn't fade. It bounces off the tile. It soaks into the grout. It lives in the room long after the person who said it has walked away, poured himself a glass of water, and gone back to watching football like nothing happened. Like he didn't just strip every quiet, invisible thing you'd ever done for him and scatter it across the floor in front of a witness. I was standing at the counter on a Tuesday evening in October, unpacking groceries I had paid for myself, my debit card, my money, $47 and change at the Kroger on Millhaven Road, because I'd stopped at the store on my way home from work and picked up the things I knew we were out of. Chicken thighs, a bag of rice, pasta, a can of crushed tomatoes, olive oil, 2 bell peppers, and a bar of the dark chocolate Ryan pretended he didn't eat but always finished before I could get to it. Derek was at the kitchen table. Ryan's cousin, 26 years old, who had been temporarily staying in our guest room since August. He was eating leftover pasta with his head down in that particular way people do when they're bracing for something they can feel coming. Ryan was leaning against the doorframe between the kitchen and the hallway, arms crossed. That expression on his face, the one I'd been seeing more and more over the past several months, that particular cocktail of contempt and boredom that men get when they've decided you're beneath addressing directly. They talk around you instead. They perform their grievances for an audience. He looked at Derek and said it loud enough to fill the room. From now on, she can buy her own food. I'm done. She's been living off me long enough. I set down the olive oil. My hands were steady. I remember noticing that, how steady my hands were, even as something behind my sternum went very, very quiet, the way a room goes quiet just before a storm makes landfall. Derek didn't look up. Ryan unfolded his arms and waited. I think he wanted tears. I think he wanted me to argue, to defend myself, to list all the dinners I'd cooked and all the groceries I'd bought and all the invisible labor I'd performed for 3 years in that house. I think he wanted a reaction he could escalate, something he could use, a reason to raise his voice and make me smaller. I looked at him for a long moment, then I nodded once. Okay, he blinked. Okay? Yes, I said. Your rule. I'll follow it. He laughed, a short disbelieving sound. He thought I was pouting. He thought the silent treatment was my weapon, and I was just sheathing it wrong. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea that the most dangerous thing a controlled person can do is stop trying to control the situation and start letting it breathe, because what lives inside a breath of air is the truth of who has actually been holding everything together. Ryan walked back into the hallway. Derek finally looked up from his pasta, met my eyes briefly, and looked back down. I folded the grocery bags, put them under the sink where I always kept them, and went upstairs to start making a list. Part 2, how we got here. I need to tell you about Ryan Calloway before I tell you about what I did, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Not the depth of it, not why it had to be exactly the way it was. I met Ryan when I was 28. He was 31. He was charming in the specific way that men are charming when they want something from you. Not dishonestly exactly, but selectively. He showed you the version of himself that was funny and capable and interested in your opinions, and he was careful at first to keep the other version out of view. We got married after 2 years. I was 30. I'd been a project coordinator at an architecture firm since I was 24, working my way up to senior coordinator, managing timelines and vendor contracts, and keeping 6-figure projects from collapsing. I was organized. I was competent. I was, by every external measure, someone who had her life together. Ryan worked in sales, business-to-business software, good money, variable income. He made more than me in his good months and less than me in his bad ones. And for the first year of our marriage, the finances felt genuinely shared. We had a joint account. We both contributed. We talked about what we bought. Then the small erosion started. They always start small. He stopped asking about purchases and started announcing them. A new set of golf clubs, a weekend fishing trip, a TV for the bedroom that I hadn't been consulted on, installed on my side of the room because the light was better. Each thing, individually, dismissible. Together, over 18 months, they built a picture I didn't let myself look at directly. The grocery thing had started about a year before that October Tuesday. He'd made a comment one morning, offhand, casual, about how much we were spending on food. We were spending about $600 a month, which for 2 adults and 1 frequently present cousin house guest was not unreasonable. I pointed that out. He'd waved it off and said, I'm just saying you have expensive taste. Expensive taste. Like I was buying truffle oil and Wagyu beef. I was buying Kroger brand pasta and whatever chicken was on sale. I told myself it was stress. His numbers had been down that quarter. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because I loved him, and because when you love someone, the benefit of the doubt feels like generosity. It takes a long time to realize it was just a loan you never stopped paying interest on. By the time October came, I'd been buying most of the groceries for 8 months. Not because we'd agreed to it, not because it was my job, but because if I didn't, the fridge stayed empty, and I was the one who got hungry and went to the store and filled it. Ryan knew this. I believe he knew this the same way people know the things they choose not to acknowledge, fully, privately, in the part of the brain that runs on logic, while the mouth keeps insisting on the more comfortable story. The comfortable story, apparently, was that I was living off him. The comfortable story was worth humiliating me in front of his cousin to tell. Fine, then we'd tell the truth. Part 3, the architecture of a plan. Here is what nobody tells you about the kind of anger that comes from being slowly, systematically underestimated by someone who sleeps in in your bed. It doesn't feel like fire. It feels like clarity. I didn't yell. I didn't lie awake drafting monologues. I didn't fantasize about dramatic confrontations or throw anything against a wall. What I did that very first night while Ryan was downstairs watching highlights and Derek was in the guest room and the house made its usual sounds of peaceful ignorance, was sit at my desk with a legal pad and start writing numbers. 8 months of grocery receipts. I keep my receipts. I keep everything, actually. A habit I developed early in my career when I learned that the people who can back up what they say are the people who keep getting believed. I had them in a folder in the filing cabinet in the closet, organized by month. I took them out and I started adding. I won't give you every figure, but I will give you the total. In the 8 months between February and October, I had spent $4,218 on groceries for this household. This was not a secret. This was not controversial. The numbers were on receipts that had my name and card information printed on them, time-stamped, itemized. Ryan's contribution in that same period, 3 Costco runs, I remembered them specifically because he'd made a production of each one, totaling approximately $460, almost all of which had been beer, paper towels, and the kind of massive quantities of chips and frozen appetizers he bought when he was expecting his friends over. I underlined the total difference 3 times, $4,218. Then I started writing a different kind of list, not for evidence, for logistics, because Ryan had made a rule, and I was going to follow it perfectly. The first week, I went to Whole Foods, specifically deliberately, because they have a labeling system I like, and I bought a pack of small round stickers in 4 colors. I chose green for mine. I labeled everything I bought. Every item in the refrigerator that belonged to me got a green sticker. My shelf in the pantry, I consolidated everything I owned to 1/2 of one shelf and put a small strip of blue painter's tape across the edge to mark the boundary. I bought a small chest freezer from Facebook Marketplace for $65 and set it up in the garage. I moved my longer storage items there. Chicken breasts, frozen vegetables, the good pasta I bought in bulk. I cooked for myself every night. Proper meals. I'm a decent cook, and I wasn't going to punish myself just because I was punishing the situation. I made chicken marsala. I made a roasted vegetable frittata. I made a slow cooker beef stew on a Sunday that smelled so good it drifted through the whole house, and I sat at the kitchen table and ate it with a book, while Ryan, 3 feet away, ate a gas station sub. He tried twice in that first week to take something of mine from the fridge. The first time, it was a container of the pasta salad I'd made. He opened it, looked at the green sticker on the lid, and put it back without saying anything. The second time, it was the good olive oil. He picked it up, noticed the sticker, set it down. He used the cheap vegetable oil from the back of the cabinet that had probably been there since before I moved in. He thought this was a phase. I could see it in his face. A sort of indulgent patience, like watching a child have a tantrum that you've decided to wait out. He kept waiting for me to crack, to laugh it off, to show up with bags from the store and pretend the whole thing had never happened. I didn't crack. I was 3 weeks into the architecture of something much larger than a grocery disagreement. Part 4, the phone call. It was a Thursday evening. I was folding laundry in the bedroom, my laundry, which I'd started doing separately. Another small adjustment, another boundary drawn with precision. When I heard Ryan on his phone in the kitchen, he wasn't trying to be quiet. That was the thing. He never tried to be quiet around me anymore because he'd stopped thinking of me as a person who had thoughts and reactions and a long memory. He thought of me the way you think of furniture. You don't lower your voice around a couch. I set down the shirt I was folding. Yeah, Emily's handling all of it. The roast, the mac and cheese. You know how she does the honey glazed carrots? Yeah, the whole thing. Saturday, 6 o'clock. Tell everyone. A pause. His laugh. Of course she is. She always does. I picked the shirt back up, smoothed it, set it on the pile. 20 people. His mother Barbara, his 2 brothers, 3 or 4 cousins, Derek among them. Various aunts, uncles, the neighbors the family had adopted over the years. His birthday dinner, the annual event he treated like a production, the kind of gathering that required days of preparation and hundreds of dollars of groceries and someone to cook and clean and set the table and make it all look effortless. The someone being me. The me he'd told 3 weeks earlier in front of a witness to stop living off him and buy her own food. I finished folding the laundry and went downstairs and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. I made a spreadsheet. Part 5, 7 days. I want to be precise about what happened in the 7 days between that phone call and the birthday dinner because I want you to understand that every single thing I did was deliberate, proportional, and entirely within the rules Ryan himself had established. I did not sabotage anything. I did not hide food or tamper with ingredients. I did not contact his family or warn them or build any external coalition. I didn't need to. I simply continued to follow his rule. Monday, I transferred $200 from my checking account to my savings account, money I would have otherwise spent on groceries for a family dinner. I noted the transfer in a small notebook I'd started keeping. Tuesday, I confirmed with myself that I had no obligation, legal, moral, or marital, to cook a meal for 20 people on the explicit orders of a man who had publicly declared I was no longer welcome to use shared groceries. I was not violating any agreement. I was honoring one. Wednesday, I cleaned the kitchen thoroughly, the way I always did, because the kitchen was still my space too, and I take care of the things I share. I just wasn't going to fill it with food that wasn't mine. Thursday, Ryan asked me casually if I needed money for groceries for Saturday. I looked at him. For my groceries, a flicker. For the dinner, I thought we were buying buying our own food, I said. That was your rule. I've been following it. His jaw tightened. That was for regular groceries. This is a family dinner. Your family dinner? I said. Whose food will it be? He walked away. Friday. His mother called the house line. Barbara Calloway was a woman I had genuinely liked once. A sturdy, practical woman from Knoxville who had raised 3 boys mostly alone and had a finely calibrated detector for nonsense. We'd had a good relationship in the early years of my marriage to her son. It had cooled as Ryan's behavior escalated, not because Barbara had turned against me, but because she hadn't turned toward me. And in these situations, neutrality is its own kind of abandonment. She wanted to confirm the time and ask if there was anything she could bring. Barbara, I said, and I kept my voice very even, I think you should ask Ryan about the arrangements. A pause. Is everything okay, Emily? Why don't you ask Ryan about the dinner? I said again. Another pause. Longer. All right, I hung up and made myself a cup of tea. Saturday morning arrived the way every reckoning does. Ordinary. Bright October sky. The smell of coffee, which Ryan had already made for himself in the kitchen. He poured his mug and leaned against the counter with the ease of a man who had already won, who couldn't imagine the landscape of a world where he hadn't. Big day, he said. You've got everything covered, right? I looked up from my toast. No, he laughed. Come on, Em. I'm not joking. The laugh died. He set his mug down. Emily, my family is coming in 6 hours. You've had 3 weeks to plan for that. He stepped toward me, not threateningly, just instinctively, the way men do when they expect proximity to produce compliance. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing, I said. You told me to buy my own food. I did that. Everything in this kitchen that belongs to me has a green sticker on it, and none of it will be on the table tonight. That's your rule, Ryan. You made it in front of Derek. You made it clearly. I've honored it. He picked up his phone. I watched his face change as he started calling restaurants, catering services, grocery stores with deli counters. It was a Saturday in late October, football season, Halloween weekend, the overlap of a dozen different events, and every place that could have helped him was either booked or quoting him numbers that made him flinch. By noon, he'd spent 3 hours on his phone and secured nothing except a promise from a mediocre Italian restaurant that they might be able to do a partial order if he called back by 2. At 12:30, he came to find me in the living room where I was reading. You did this on purpose, he said. I set my book down. I followed your rule, I said. On purpose? Yes. The same way you made that rule on purpose. The same way you said it loud enough for Derek to hear on purpose. The same way you've been telling people you support me while I've been spending $4,000 on groceries for this house in the past 8 months on purpose. His face did something complicated. That's not, I didn't mean it like that. I have receipts, I said, itemized. 8 months. I'd be happy to show them. He stood in the living room doorway and said nothing for a long moment. I need you to help me fix this, he said finally. His voice had lost its edge. What was underneath it was smaller. I know you do, I said, and I picked my book back up. Part 6, 5 o'clock. They started arriving at 5:30. Barbara first, with a covered dish of something. Green bean casserole, it turned out, because Barbara always brought something even when she'd been told not to. Ryan's brothers Marcus and Joel with their wives and a combined 4 children who immediately scattered through the house. Aunt Linda, who announced her arrival with a declaration about traffic. Derek, who had been staying in the guest room and therefore had a front row seat to the past 3 weeks, and who positioned himself quietly by the entryway like someone who knew they were about to watch something important. They walked in asking about the smell. What smelled so good? Was that the roast? The house smelled like nothing, because nothing was cooking. The stove was cold. The oven was cold. The counters were bare, except for a bowl of decorative gourds I'd set out in September and never moved. Linda pushed open the kitchen door first. She had a gift for leading the charge into rooms. She stopped dead. The silence spread from the kitchen outward, traveling through the hallway and into the living room like a current. I heard it happen, the conversation stopping in sequence, each one trailing off as the quiet moved past it. Barbara came into the kitchen doorway. She looked at the bare counters, the cold stove, the empty oven. She looked at Ryan. What is going on? Ryan was standing in the center of the kitchen with the specific stillness of a man whose story has just run out. He forced a laugh, the kind that's supposed to imply everyone else is overreacting, and said, "There's been a misunderstanding." "No," I said. Every head turned. I was standing at the edge of the kitchen. I hadn't moved from where I'd been standing for the past 10 minutes, waiting. I was wearing the gray sweater I wear on ordinary evenings. I had not dressed up. I did not feel the need. I kept my voice level. Not cold, level. The way you speak when you want people to hear every word. 3 weeks ago, Ryan told me in front of Derek, loud enough for everyone in the kitchen to hear, to buy my own food and stop living off him. So that's what I did. My groceries have green stickers on them. My shelf is separate. I cooked my own meals. I didn't spend a single dollar on food for this dinner, because this dinner belongs to the people who were invited by the man who told me I was living off him. A beat. I have receipts, I added, if anyone wants to see what $4,000 of shared groceries looks like. The room was very quiet. Derek by the entryway nodded once. He said that, he said. I was there. Barbara's face didn't crumble. It did something more final than crumbling. It settled into a kind of stone-cold recognition, like a door closing quietly on a room you've decided you're done with. Ryan, her voice was very even, is that true? It was one argument. You invited 20 people, Barbara said slowly, in the voice she must have used when her sons were children and had done something she'd specifically told them not to your wife's house, after telling her she had been living off you, and then you expected her to cook anyway. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Marcus, Ryan's older brother, said it quietly, to no one in particular. Man, just order the pizzas and apologize. Part 7. Delivery fees and silence. So that's what happened. Ryan Calloway stood in the kitchen he had expected me to fill and spent $432. I know because the receipt was on the counter the next morning. On rush delivery from 2 different restaurants, plus tip, plus the delivery fees that accumulate when you order on a Saturday evening with no notice. The food arrived in stages. There was no centerpiece. There was no roast. There was no honey glazed anything. There were boxes of pasta, cardboard containers of salad, and 2 large pizzas for the children. And everyone ate off paper plates at the kitchen table and the dining room table with the leaf inserted. And the conversation had the careful, quiet quality of people being very deliberate about what they chose to talk about. Barbara pulled me aside before anyone touched the food. We stood in the hallway near the bottom of the stairs, and she looked at me for a long moment with the expression of someone who has been doing math for 3 weeks in the back of their head and has finally come up with a number they don't like. I should have been paying closer attention, she said. I'm sorry, Emily. You don't have to apologize for him. I'm not apologizing for him, she said. I'm apologizing for not asking you how you were sooner. She put her hand briefly on my arm. You've been making these dinners for 4 years. I've eaten at your table for 4 years. She stopped. I should have said something before it got here. I didn't have anything to say to that. She wasn't wrong. After dinner, after the relatives trickled out with their leftovers and their paper plates and their carefully maintained expressions of normalcy, after Derek retreated to the guest room, after the house went quiet, Ryan stood in the kitchen looking at the counters, which were covered in takeout containers and cardboard instead of dishes. He looked at the cold stove. He looked at me. Was all of this really necessary? He asked. I thought about what to say. I thought about $4,218. I thought about Tuesday evenings at Kroger, bags heavy on my arms, choosing the chicken on sale. I thought about every dinner I'd cooked and every dish I'd washed and every morning I'd refilled the coffee before he woke up without ever being asked. And I thought about the voice he'd used when he said it loud enough for Derek to hear. I thought about how, for 3 years, I had treated my own house like a job I wasn't allowed to be proud of. You told me to stop living off you, I said. I picked up my keys from the hook by the door. So I did. Epilogue. After the house. That was 14 months ago. I'll tell you what happened briefly, because you're probably wondering. Ryan and I went to 3 sessions of couples counseling with a therapist named Dr. Marlene Fossey, who had her master's from Vanderbilt and 15 years of practice and the specific, precise quality of patience that comes from having heard every version of every story. She was not unkind to Ryan. She was also not fooled by him. In the second session, he used the phrase, "She's always been dramatic," and Dr. Fossey said gently but without hesitation, "Ryan, dramatic people don't keep 8 months of receipts. That's not drama, that's documentation." She asked him to articulate what he believed I contributed to the household. He started with his income. She waited. He sat with the question for a long time. He couldn't finish the list. We didn't go to a 4th session. Not because the therapy failed, but because the therapy worked. It showed us both, with the clean clarity of an outside eye, what the inside had looked like from the beginning. Ryan saw it too. I believe that. I don't think he was a monster. I think he was a man who had been allowed to be thoughtless for so long that thoughtlessness had become structural, load-bearing, invisible. He didn't want to demolish it. I did. I moved out in December. I found an apartment on the east side of the city, 2nd floor, good light, a kitchen with counter space I didn't have to share. I made chicken marsala the first night. I ate it alone at my own table with a book and a glass of wine and the specific rare quiet of a life that finally made sense. Derek, for whatever it's worth, texted me when he heard we were separating. "You deserved better. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. I appreciated it." I told him so. Barbara still sends cards on my birthday. She doesn't have to. I told her she didn't have to. She sends them anyway. The filing cabinet with the grocery receipts is still in the closet of my new apartment. I don't take them out anymore. I don't need to. They did what they were for. I was telling a friend about all of it recently, sitting at my kitchen table, same table I moved from the house, the one Ryan always said took up too much space. And she asked me if I ever regretted how I handled it, if I wished I'd said something sooner, fought back louder, drawn the line differently. I thought about it for a real moment. No, I said, because if I'd yelled, he would have called me crazy. If I'd cried, he would have called it manipulation. If I'd laid out the evidence calmly, he would have called it dramatic. I picked up my coffee. The only language he couldn't argue with was his own. She nodded slowly. "You gave him exactly what he asked for, down to the last sticker," I said.